Hello and welcome to another lecture for History of Journalism. I'm Professor Harper, and today we're going to talk about Truman Capote, one of the more innovative writers we will see. The opening photograph is an interesting one because it was a very famous party that occurred in New York at the Plaza Hotel 50 years ago. On the left is Truman Capote, and on the right is Katharine Graham, the publisher of the Washington Post. It was kind of a coming out party for Mrs. Graham, who had just become head of the news organization after her husband had died. So Truman Capote was born in New Orleans in 1922. He was abandoned by his mother and raised by his elderly aunts and cousins in Alabama. As a child, he lived a solitary and lonely existence, turning to writing for solace. He wrote one time, "I began writing really sort of seriously when I was about 11. I say seriously in the sense that like other kids go home and practice the violin or the piano or whatever, I used to go home from school every day and I would write for about 3 hours. I was obsessed by it." In his teens, Capote was sent to New York to live with his mother and her new husband, and he was, overwhelmed, coming from essentially the South and the country. He was overwhelmed by the city and he dropped out of school, but he got a job, a low-level job with the New Yorker at the age of 17. Within a few years, he was writing regularly for a wide variety of publications, and one of his stories, Miriam, attracted the attention of publisher Bennett Cerf, who signed the young writer to a contract with Random House. In 1948, Other Voices, Other Rooms received instant notoriety for its prose and also its frank discussion of homosexual themes. Capote himself was gay. He was lionized by the social elite and was seen at the best parties, the clubs, and restaurants, something that he wrote about and actually got him into trouble later on. In 1958, Breakfast at Tiffany's, the movie, was a great hit and enhanced Truman Capote's popularity and a place among high society. In 1959, Capote set about creating a new literary genre, which was the nonfiction novel, which became In Cold Blood. The notion here is that he was telling a quote-unquote true story about the murder of the Clutter family in Kansas and using the storytelling techniques of a novel. So that In Cold Blood was the story of the 1959 murder of the 4 members of the Clutter family. And he left his friends in New York and went to Kansas to look at small-town life and record the process by which they coped with the murders. During his stay, the 2 murderers were caught, and Capote began interviewing them for a long period of time. And for 6 years he became involved in the lives of the killers and the townspeople, taking thousands of pages of notes. And one thing that's interesting about In Cold Blood is that while it was supposed to be nonfiction and it was based on an actual event, the mass murder, he actually took liberty with a variety of the events and got himself into trouble in terms of making a few things up. In 1975, Capote began to work on a project that explored the intimate details of his friends, the rich and famous, and he called it Answered Prayers. And there was an excerpt of it that was printed, and his friends just absolutely deserted him. They didn't want their stories to be made public, and it sent him into a huge spiral of drug and alcohol abuse, and he really wrote very little after 1975. And when he died at the age of 59 in 1984, there was absolutely no evidence that he continued working on the book Answered Prayers. But we know Capote from In Cold Blood and Breakfast at Tiffany's, some really interesting stories, and we'll read an excerpt of In Cold Blood for this week. So that's what we have for today. Thanks very much, and we'll see you online.